My sophomore year of high school was impeccable. I had phenomenal grades, straight A plus averages. I was involved in a myriad of extracurriculars. I was the first school poetry out loud champion. I competed on the mock trial team, and I had been elected president of my class. All of these things happened, and yet, going into the first semester of my junior year, just a few days in, I dropped out of high school. This happened after discovering a test. A test? Well, what was that test? Folks, it was an IQ test. That test challenged a lot of the beliefs that I had about myself, which had been formed based off perceptions of others. This idea that I was intelligent, this idea that I was a strong, conscientious student, a person of high character. And this test wiped away all of that. It stated that I was in the superior low range of intellectual ability, and the result was antithetical to all these ideas that I held about myself, ideas that I thought to be true. I adhered to this idea for a long time that I was intelligent and capable of doing anything I put my mind to. So discovering that test really set me off mentally. It robbed me of my motivation. It made me feel like any effort was a waste of time. I felt like a failure and like I had nothing of value to offer to the world. I believe that my story of how I became a high school dropout in itself poses a challenge to this societal notion, this stereotype that all high school dropouts are lazy, that all high school dropouts, maybe they had a drug problem or alcohol problem, maybe they just weren't motivated to get it all done. The activities that I was involved with, the grades I had in the classroom, my performance inside and outside of the classroom in high school went against all of those stereotypical beliefs. I mention this because I know there's other people out there who are high school dropouts, and I sympathize with that feeling of being lesser or seen as the other compared to the rest of society. So, those are the circumstances that led up to my dropping out of high school. This was in 2015. During my actual high school dropout period, I was oftentimes void of hope. In the months after filling out the paperwork, I recall making a journal entry. I started a journal, one that I still have to this day. And in that journal, the first words are fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Those are the first words because those are the words that best characterized my life at that time. I looked in the mirror and amorphous face looked back, totally lacking in shape or definition or any resemblance of what I looked like in the past. My self esteem was plummeted. I seemed like I had no respect for myself, absolutely no self love or compassion for myself. And this was all due to the regret and despair of dropping out of high school. At one point during my dropout period, I had an epiphany moment that I needed to do something. I needed to get back out there. And I had this thought in my head that someday, I would return to high school. I would work diligently and I would become the first in my immediate family to graduate high school. That's the goal I set out for myself. So after spending a long period of time in isolation, I set out and got a job working as a cashier at Dollar Tree. And it was beneficial in many aspects. It got me out of the house. It boosted my confidence, got me some social interaction, which even as an introvert is highly necessary in my view. At least it is for me. But there was a negative. In working at the local retail store, I would often see some of my former classmates come in, and naturally they would ask questions like, "What happened?" and "How are you doing?" And these questions, although good intentioned, they made me feel embarrassed and ashamed because everybody in high school held this perception of myself as this high achieving student who is going to do so many amazing things with his life, and the outcome that I actually had at that particular moment in time went against all of that. And that only further intensifies my ambitions to someday return to high school. After working at Dollar Tree and accumulating some savings, I left the position and I actually contacted the guidance department of my former high school, stating my intention to return and get my degree, my high school diploma. Not degree, I don't know what I'm thinking. Anyhow, there was actually a little bit of hostility and opposition to this idea of me returning. I had been out of high school for 2 years, and I remember one of the high school guidance counselors saying to me, Tyler, at this point, like, why not just go to community college? And I explained how I want to be the first in my immediate family to graduate high school. And he said, at this point, honors and AP classes are off the table. If you do come back, you'll just be in the remedial classes, the regular classes. And I challenged that as well. And I said, no, I'm an honors and AP student. I was before. I thrived in that environment. I need to be challenged if I'm going to do this. And eventually guidance capitulated, but it took persuasion from some of my teachers as well, who had remembered how talented I was as a student. So I spent the summer working on my advanced placement work for the AP classes I would be taking, and I returned to high school. It wasn't smooth sailing from the start. Immediately, I felt a great deal of anxiety because the only social connections I had leading up to this in those past 2 years were my interactions with customers at Dollar Tree, which aren't really comprehensive conversations. They're more just like, hi, how are you doing today? Like a very robotic, and did you find everything all right? Is there anything else I can help you with? Have a wonderful day. And that's the extent of my social interactions for the past 2 years. So I felt very overwhelmed initially returning to high school. And that overwhelmed feeling that I had led to me almost leaving again, just 8 days into the school year. I remember, seeing the younger siblings of my former classmates and thinking to myself, wow, I am now in classes with the siblings of my former classmates. This is so embarrassing. Here I am, I'm this older student who's back in high school in classes with all these younger people, and the people who are the same age as me are way ahead of me, and I'm just so behind. I was operating on a totally different timeline, and at the time, I just thought that was not okay. I started to develop a sense of failure again. I ended up getting hospitalized for mental health reasons because there was an incident where I just had this culmination of feelings of not wanting to be here anymore. And so I started a partial hospitalization program. And over the course of that program, I attended hours of group therapy for weeks. I got put on a medication to help me mitigate the effects of social anxiety. And soon enough, I was back in the classroom. From there, things went about as well as they could. I had a lot of sporadic attendance over the course of my final 2 years of high school. But now this is the fun part. What did I actually achieve once I went back? Well, one of the things I did was I joined the mock trial team, and in my tenure on that mock trial team junior year, we swept our division for the first time in school history. We beat every opponent in our division, and we advanced to the playoffs for the first time in my high school's history. And this was an incredibly good feeling. Felt like I was on top of the world. But it wasn't just extracurricular activity where I thrived. I also performed very well in my AP and honors classes, straight A plus averages, including advanced placement in U.S. history with Mr. Riley, who's known and has a reputation as being a strict grader and hard teacher. He was probably one of my favorite teachers from high school, so I kind of don't align with that line of thinking. But nonetheless, it was a challenging class that I happened to do really well in. And then AP English Language and Composition with Mrs. Hensel, I also did incredibly well in. And I ended up getting perfect scores of 5 on both of those AP exams once AP exams came around. For those who don't know how AP exams work, real quickly, they're scored from 1 to 5, 1 being not qualified for college credit, 5 being extremely well qualified. A minimum score of 3 is necessary in order to pass the exam. And most universities and institutions will accept a 3 as evidenced and that you're capable and competent in that subject and that you're deserving of credit at the college level. That was a pretty incredible comeback story because here I went from being socially isolated for 2 years, not doing anything academic for 2 years, to suddenly being back in the classroom. And I had significant hardship at the beginning of that school year, even. But with medications and therapy, it put me in a position where I was able to then thrive. And then going into senior year, I started off the year with 5 AP classes. I ultimately dropped down to 4 AP classes, which I would finish the year with. I passed all my AP classes. I got a 5 in world history, a 4 in AP psychology, a 3 in AP stats, and a 3 in AP English literature. I could have done better, but I had like 90 something absences this school year. In large part because things still weren't perfect. I still struggled a great deal with my mental health, even though I was back in high school and doing well relative to a lot of my peers. I don't think many people in my position of being absent 90 plus times would go on to pass all their AP exams, but I did that. I essentially self-taught most of the material, the bulk of the material. That year, though, I also participated in 2 incredibly time-consuming extracurriculars. And those extracurriculars were a speech competition hosted by the Lions Club of Massachusetts, and I joined DECA Club, the Distributive Educational Clubs of America, which provides students with opportunities to learn about different fields in business. I chose the category of business finance, and I worked assiduously to maximize the probability of me doing well in that competition. So now let's get to the results. With the Lions Club, and both of these were going on at the same time, at the Lions Club, there were 5 stages. There was the club stage, which was where you start. I won first place there. There was the zone stage, which I advanced to, and I won first place there. And then there was I think it was the regional competition next. And at the regional competition, I also got first. And then there was the district competition. I got first there. So 4 first place placements in a row. And I got a spot in the state finals, competing for the title of best speaker in the state. Mind you, I was just a high school dropout a few years ago. And now I'm competing for this prestigious title. I ultimately ended up as the runner-up because at the event, I think that I did really well performance-wise. There's things I could do better, but I'm not hard on myself about it. I'm proud of how well I performed in that competition. I poured so many hours into drafting and polishing a speech and perfecting my delivery of that speech, memorizing and working on my oratory ability. So I really couldn't ask for more. It was an excellent time, really fun memories from that competition. And then there was DECA. I chose business finance simply because I come from a background of poverty, and I wanted to learn skills that would be useful in the short and long term of my life. And that's exactly what happened. I went in with the intention of let's learn as much as possible, and if I win, that'd be great, and I'm going to do my best to try to win, but if I don't, at the very least, I learned something new about something I previously knew nothing about. We had a practice session at Nichols College where we got to do a practice role play and be evaluated on our presentation to get an idea of where we're at. And I got a near perfect score on my practice role play, which made me feel ecstatic because my hard work was paying off. I was getting the results I wanted. And then the district competition began. At District 7, I won first place in my category of business finance. Now, my test score at the district level was rather low. It was like a 73 out of 100. But my role play presentation scores were so off the charts and above the rest of the competition that it carried me to first place despite the low test score. Nonetheless, I knew that if I wanted any real shot of getting a high placement at the state level, I would need to drastically improve my test score. So I drilled and drilled and drilled, taking practice tests, reviewing every answer, the ones I got wrong, including the ones that I got right. It was time consuming, but I did it. And then at the state level, I won first place again. In my first and only year of doing DECA, I won first place in my district, first place in the state of Massachusetts for the category of business finance. And it was just an amazing experience. I felt like I was on top of the world. At the state level, remember, I went from having that, not best test score to having the second highest exam score in the state. On one of my role plays, I scored a 99, which is like almost unheard of. That's incredibly hard to do. It's rare when it does happen. Well, it happened for me. I scored a 99 on one of my role plays, and that first place placement at the state level earned me a spot at ICDC, which is the International Career Development Conference. I didn't end up getting a high placement there. Like, I didn't finish top 10 or anything. There were like 23,000 people there. And in hindsight, there's things I would have done differently if I had known about this competition sooner and didn't find out about it till just my senior year. If I had found out about it earlier, I would have been able to perfect my performances, and I have no doubt I would have placed at ICDC too. But, that was my first year, so. But being at ICDC was an enormous, fantastic opportunity. They had all kinds of workshops, employers, and different activities for you to engage in beyond the scope of just the competition. And I got to be in Orlando, Florida for a week, which was fantastic. So these are the extracurricular activities that consume my senior year. And now we get to the question of colleges. Do I go to college as a former high school dropout? Well, of course I do. I'm the first in my immediate family about to graduate high school. Of course I want to go to college and build on that and create a better future for myself. I applied to 20 schools. I got into all the schools that I applied to, from what I can remember. They weren't like super off the chart. I wasn't applying to like Harvard or Yale or anything, but I did get into my number one choice, the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And I began my studies there later that year. So I remember graduating June 7th, 2019, high school. It's like the story came full circle. So my final message to all of you, and thank you for hearing my story, my experiences, hearing about the circumstances that led up to me dropping out. We got to challenge some stereotypes here. And we talked a little bit about the struggles I endured during my dropout period, encounters I had, hardships, etc. And how those struggles continued once I returned to high school, but I ultimately was able to capitalize on my strengths and have a successful high school career. So my final message to all of you, especially if you're a high school dropout or considering being a high school dropout, I want you to know that you're not alone. I've been there. I've done that. I want you to know that your life is not over. You're fully capable of doing whatever you set your mind to. You are competent. I mean, just look at me. I had this intelligence test say that I'm a person in the superior low range of ability, and yet I performed all these things. I would question the value of the test itself, but I'm a strong believer in human potential, particularly when people apply themselves and don't allow some test score to determine their self-worth. So, lastly, there's a quote by President Calvin Coolidge I'll leave you with, and I'm telling you, you want to hear this. This is an all-timer, folks. Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. I've adhered to that quote since high school now, and I've applied it to so many situations in my life and found it highly beneficial. It's been very advantageous for me in having a positive mindset and strong perspective in different situations, especially in dealing with a variety of challenges. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please put them down below. If you want to share some of your own experience, I'd be happy to hear your experience and see the similarities or what differences there may be. I know people drop out for a myriad of reasons, And certainly my story isn't applicable to everyone, but I hope you found some inspiration in this. I hope this motivates you to keep going forward. And yeah, don't allow perceptions of others or certainly a singular test score define your worth. You're worth so much more than you know. You deserve a better future. And as my algebra teacher from ninth grade had inscribed on her wall, a quote: "Smart is not something you are, smart is something you get with hard work and consistent effort." Folks, work hard, stay consistent, you got this.